I'm in Howie Klein's house in the LA area talking about politics. A weird combination here. I come from an evangelical religious background. Howie was a record producer and has a house full of gold records and an art collection of great note, Andy Warhol and a lot of other people you've heard of. But I just want to talk to him a little bit about his atheism and his politics. We're connecting because I'm doing a video series with candidates you're backing, Democratic candidates.
Progressive Democrats, yes.
Progressive Democrats. And I just want to ask you briefly, I know that you've been involved in politics since college, but how did you get involved in this present, shall we call it, counterinsurgency against Obama and against Obama's lynch mob, is the way I think of it, who spent 8 years obstructing him and now, have Trump in the White House. So I just want you to talk a little bit about that.
Okay, first let me go back a little bit. Way before college, I did get involved with politics in New York, and my grandfather was a socialist, and he was sort of my political mentor. And he once told me, never trust the Democrats. The only thing worse than a Democrat is a Republican. And I always remembered that. And I admired him very, very much. And I remember when I was a kid, I sort of shied away from the Democratic machine in New York City. Like a guy named Abe Beame was the mayor, a corrupt piece of garbage. And I liked John Lindsay. Even though Lindsay was a Republican who then turned to be an independent, eventually became a Democrat, he was far more liberal. I mean, Beame was the establishment guy and the conservative guy. And Lindsay, even though he was a Republican, was much more liberal and represented anti-war policies, which Beame didn't, etc. So eventually I wound up working as an elevator operator for Robert Kennedy. And I used to, not that he consulted me, but I used to hear him talking with his aides when he was running for president. So I've always sort of been involved with politics my whole life. And when I was in college, I actually ran for office. I ran for freshman class president and won, and later I was the chairman of the Student Activities Board. But that isn't what you really want to know about. You want to know why I'm involved now in campaigns for progressive Democrats. So in 2005, I started this organization called Blue America. And Blue America, which I run with two other bloggers, Digby from Digby's Hullabaloo and John Amato from Crooks and Liars, the three of us have this political action committee which raises money and awareness for progressives. So that means not necessarily, if there were progressive Republicans, we might raise money for them too, but there aren't any. We wouldn't raise money for a conservative Democrat ever. We raise money against conservative Democrats, someone like Kirsten Sinema, who Chuck Schumer decided should be the next senator from Arizona. She literally has the worst voting record of any Democrat in the House, meaning she has, what we use is a scale that's put together by Progressive Punch. So Progressive Punch does every single vote. They look at every single vote, and they have an algorithm that rates every member of Congress. The highest would be, say, there are a couple who are in this category, but Pramila Jayapal, who's a congresswoman from Seattle. She has a 100 score, 100. That means every vote she takes is a progressive vote on anything. The opposite end of the scale is Kirsten Sinema. She has a 19. It's not 19 every single day, but it recently was 19. That means she votes with the Republicans 89% of the time and with the Democrats 19% of the time. But yet Chuck Schumer decides, she's perfect. She's perfect. And he handpicked her to run for the U.S. Senate from Arizona. I don't think he really handpicked her because she's so conservative. That didn't bother him. I think the real reason that he picked her was because she's so corrupt. So when I say that she's corrupt, how do I know she's corrupt, you might be thinking. And I'll tell you. So I served on a board of a nonprofit with her, and I noticed she's a psychopath. And I was serving on this board with this woman of a very good organization, and I realized I'm serving with a crazy person. And then she decided to run for Congress, so I sort of kept my eye on her. She's a member of the House Financial Services Committee. They're charged with overseeing Wall Street and the banks. She's taken more money from the people she should be overseeing, the banks, Wall Street. She's taking more money from them than any other Democrat on that committee. I mean, Republicans take lots of money from these people, but Democrats, you think, oh, Democrats won't do that. Kirsten Sinema will. So she's now the head of the Blue Dog Caucus. Perfect for Chuck Schumer. He's going to put her into office in this wave that's coming, because Republicans are just going to be swept away. And the worst possible Democrat is going to wind up in the U.S. Senate just looking to vote with the Republicans like she does now. So it's really awful. So seeing this kind of thing for years and years and years, starting in 2005 for me, when I started studying it very closely, made me want to do something to try to help progressives to win elections. And we've been doing that. I mean, we helped Bernie, we helped Elizabeth Warren, we helped Alan Grayson, Donna Edwards, and lots of other good, solid progressives. I mean, today there are people like Ted Lieu in Congress, who we helped when they were first getting started.
Howie Klein, who, amongst other things, besides being a record executive who created a lot of interesting bands, also is an art collector. And here's a Andy Warhol that he's got hanging in his dining room, partially obscured by this beautiful piece of, I guess it's from India, isn't it?
Yes.
Indian art. But, anyway, I just want to ask you, you're such an interesting guy. Between the art collection and the records, talk about some of the bands you work with, just so folks can locate you in rock and roll history.
Okay, so I'll start out where I started out as the chairman of the Student Activities Board in the mid to late 1960s at my college, State University of New York at Stony Brook, when I was booking bands. So and I booked Jimi Hendrix on his first show in America. I booked The Who. I booked the Jefferson Airplane and the Grateful Dead, and lots of great bands. But I want to just tell you a story that'll give you an idea about what was going on then. So there was this band that I don't remember exactly how I got turned on to them, but they were playing as the house band in a little tiny club in New York. About as from my door to this door. I mean, it was a very small club. And they were playing every night because they were in New York doing the finishing touches on their first album. They didn't have a record out yet. And I loved them. I thought their music was mind-blowing, and I used to go see them every night. And, if I missed class, I missed class. I got to see this band. I became very close with them. Everyone was using drugs in those days. I had some exotic ones that they were very happy to try. And this was 1966, I think, 67 maybe. And I asked them if they would come out and play at my college. And they said yes, they would. I think what I paid them was $750 to play. In the interim, between the time that I got to know them really well in the spring and summer, and then in the fall when school started again, they had a #1 hit called Light My Fire. And the band was The Doors. And I remember watching them and thinking how great they were and how wonderful it was that they were playing at my school and for $750. And one of the student government guys came up to me, a guy named Alan Krantz, and he started shaking me out of my drug-induced reverie and said, "Did you pay these clowns yet?" Huh? What? And he was angry because Jim Morrison was taking this long pause, and he was offended by this long pause and insisted that I not pay him because of this long pause that offended him so much. So after college, after years of doing this and really loving it, I went overseas, and I lived abroad for 7 years, almost 7 years. I traveled around, especially around Asia. Spent a lot of time in Afghanistan, Nepal, India, Sri Lanka, Pakistan, Turkey, Iran, and loved the music over there and really got into it. And then when I got back to New York, I ran into someone who I knew from the Doors days. He had been working at Elektra. I met him at the Doors concert we did, and he said, "Oh, you've got to come and see this new band I'm managing." And I said, "Well, Danny, I'm not really into bands anymore. It's not my kind of music. I like Indian music. That's what I listen to. So please, you've got to come see this band. They're wonderful." I argued with him. He wouldn't take no for an answer. So I went and saw this new band and changed my life. And the band, who didn't have a record out yet, was the Ramones. And they were playing at CBGB's, which I'd never heard of. And not only did I meet the Ramones that day, which was a really big deal for me, and like I said, changed my life, I also met Seymour Stein, who years later hired me to run his record label, Sire, which was the ultimate new wave kind of record label with bands like the Smiths and Talking Heads and Depeche Mode, etc. So I moved after meeting the Ramones, I moved to San Francisco, and I started my own label called 415 Records. 415 is not just the area code of San Francisco, it's also the police code for disturbing the peace. Like if you put on we have a band at your house and they're making a lot of noise, and the police come, they say, "We've got a 415 on the corner of." So that's how we got the name. And I signed bands. One band, the first band we signed was a band called the Nuns. And then the first band that we had that was really successful. Well, we had two pretty close in time that were both very successful. One was a band from San Francisco called Romeo Void, and the other were these kids from New Orleans called the Red Rockers. That was my first number one that I ever had. They did a song called China, and they had just sent me a single. I had a radio show, and they sent me a single, and I played the single, and I said, "Wow, this band is so great, I would sign them." And then the next week they showed up on my doorstep. Just from me saying I would sign them, there they were. So I signed them.
Gold and platinum records here that Howie has all over his house, that he produced bands and, just crazy. He knew everybody, sort of like a who's who of rock and roll history. But right now, Howie is standing here with me. And Howie, you were saying earlier, you're
Ice-T.
Yeah, Ice-T, amongst others. But Howie's giving all this stuff away. I don't mean to people walking down the street, but he's auctioning them off. A couple of weeks ago, he donated a guitar signed by all the band members of Green Day. What did you do with Green Day anyway?
They were on my label. So I was the president of Reprise Records, and they were our star band. And they gave me a guitar, and they signed it, and I gave it to Randy Bryce, and we used it to raise money for Randy.
Yeah, and I interviewed Randy in Milwaukee a couple of weeks ago to help make people understand that there is a new face to the Democratic Party of working people, women, true progressives, the kind of people you're zeroing in on. And you're basically donating all these gold albums, and you're raising some real money for the candidates.
Yeah, the most we ever raised from one auction, it wasn't an auction, it was kind of a lottery, was for Alan Grayson, a Democrat from Florida, progressive Democrat from Florida. We raised $97,000. So we're really eager to, someone to get one of these for $100,000. So no one's going to do that in an auction, but the way we do it is we'll ask people for a week just to donate to the candidate.
Yeah, that's great.
And whatever they donate to the candidate, whether it's $1 or $1,000, doesn't matter what they donate, as long as they donate something, then that gives them an opportunity to win in a drawing. And
where do they find out about this stuff, by the way?
On my blog, Down with Tyranny, I write about it. Crooks and Lawyers writes about it.
But just tell people where your blog is.
Downwithtyranny.com.
Downwithtyranny.com. You have to follow downwithtyranny.com.
Yes.
Absolutely. No matter what else you do. From another piece of art here, which I think you said was an album cover. Isn't that right?
Well, first it was a piece of art, and then I used it for an album cover. We did an album cover called Just Say Roe, which is about Roe v. Wade. And it was, all the bands did songs about women's right to choice.
What year was that? It's kind of.
I'm bad with
Take
years.
a guess.
If I had to guess, say 1990.
Okay, so 1990 is basically when I was totally getting out of the religious right. So he's making a record called
Just Say Roe.
Just Say Roe. And I am in Jerry Falwell's borrowed jet with my dad, finding a gold-plated 45 loaded sidearm in the armrest of his plane that had been given to him by Menachem Begin, because he had helped Begin get a deal for, I think it was the F-15 or the F-16 from Reagan. I mean, this is one crazy fucking insane country.
You could have made history right at that moment.
Yeah. And I was just thinking, what happens if Jerry Falwell takes a shot in a pressurized cabin at 36,000 feet? But never mind. He was kind of a weird guy. And I spoke at Liberty Baptist College from his pulpit twice. And those tapes, by the way, are no longer available. All the archive of my dad speaking there still miraculously stayed there. But like, I don't exist. I'm vapor because I got out. But talk about the kind of intersection between art, music, and what you're doing in politics, because I see it as one thing.
Yeah, I do too. I always have.
This is not like two different things.
Right. I mean, I grew up in the 60s. Oh, I mean, I grew up in the 50s too, but I grew up in the 60s, and even fashion and sexuality, all of it was interrelated. I mean, just having long hair back in the early 60s meant that you probably used marijuana. It meant that you probably liked a certain kind of music. It meant that you were against the war in Vietnam. It meant that you believed in racial equality. It meant that you thought that women had an equal role in society to men. Or you could tell all that from the way somebody looked. Things have changed, of course. I mean, for me, it was very ironic that I got arrested in Texas by a long-haired policeman, and I was so horrified that it was a long-haired policeman that was arresting me.
Yeah, he was a traitor.
Yes.
Like, what the hell have you got long hair for?
Exactly.
Yeah, well, the funny thing is, here I am out on the road with the original gang that made anti-abortion the litmus test for the Republican Party. And here we are in 2017 in the middle of trying to push back against a Republican Party that has gone so far, seriously, that even my dad and Jerry Falwell would now be shocked. They would be looking, for instance, at what Jerry Falwell Jr. did in supporting Trump. And at some point, his old man, certainly my dad, would have just said, hey, this is crazy. So that we're getting to a kind of a tipping point where if you had fast forwarded me from 1979 or 1980 into this environment, I'd be just saying to you, this is impossible. This guy would never be president. George Bush was our kind of person. He talked a good game about abortion, but wouldn't do anything. He was just establishment. Now we have a guy who's a total con artist.
And he would do anything because he's a con artist, right?
He's a con artist. Yeah. And so basically, if he could please Mike Pence and Ralph Reed by hanging gay people from lampposts, they'd be swinging from lampposts. I mean, there's no...
And we don't know when that'll happen either. I mean, anything could happen with this guy. It's very scary.
It's funny. It's actually changed the arc of my own life. I look at this country differently. Nothing has surprised me like this has.
Yeah. And like I said earlier, my grandfather was the one who gave me my inspiration politically, and this, I don't think, would have surprised him.
Yeah. Behind Howie is kind of well known because you were on TV a lot with some of your famous bands, right?
Well, yes. This painting by Attila Lukács was behind my desk. So whenever anyone would come in to interview me, because of the bands on my label, this painting would be the background. So
was Green Day on the label then?
Green Day was on the label, Neil Young was on the label, Joni Mitchell was on the label, Depeche Mode, The Smiths, and then Morrissey. We had lots and lots of well-known bands.
Did you ever plug these guys into politics? So the reason I ask is because I'm fascinated by the kind of stand Green Day keeps taking in their albums, and I just keep wondering if you hooked them into that, and other artists too. They just got into it by themselves.
No, some artists I helped along. Yeah. I didn't have to help Green Day at all. They were there. Billy Joe Armstrong, the leader of the band, the guy who writes the songs, was the son of a single parent,
right,
living pretty rough as a kid, and very, very smart guy. And he intuited right away what the class situation was in the United States and where his place was in it. And that has informed his songwriting as well as his political stands to this day. And he's the real thing. He didn't get it out of someone like me telling him about it. He didn't get it from a book. He got it from real life. That's why I admire Billy Joe so much.
One of the things, I've got this new project out, and this is sort of a plug for it, but really it actually fits in.
This is Lucy.
Called Letter to Lucy, a manifesto of creative redemption for the age of fascism, Trump, and lies. And the opening chapter is has a Green Day video in it, and also later in the book I developed their take on our civilization with the fall of the Byzantine Empire. And then I have more of their music and some of his lyrics, because I think actually Billy Joe is kind of an American philosopher on a par with
Bob Dylan?
Hey, we
Right?
said it at the same time.
That's
I
right.
didn't set that up.
Right.
See how cool that is? That was very cool.
I've been saying that for years and years and years, and some people get it immediately the way you do, and other people look at me like I'm crazy. Like, what does he have to do? He's punk rock. What does he have to do with Bob Dylan?
No, I think Billy Joe's a serious person.
He absolutely is.
And not only that, I love the music, but in addition to that, the way he nails it again and again and again with the lyrics, I think this is the poetry of understanding our time.
Frank, it literally, we haven't known each other that long.
Yeah.
I've been talking about this for 25 years. For 25 years,
That's
I've been
great.
saying what you're saying right now. And in fact, when I was sitting at my desk and I was being filmed by people with this behind me, I was trying to convince journalists of just what you said about Billy Joe.
Yeah, because I've been listening to the music for a long time, but I also feel that his reaction to Bush and the Iraq War was the best there was. And it happened that my son was in the Marine Corps at that time fighting in a war I didn't agree with because he had volunteered right out of high school for the experience. When Clinton was president, we weren't at war. He just wanted to, try something. Then all of a sudden he's fighting for this idiot George Bush that my family knew personally.
Right.
The Bush Sr. and Barbara Bush came and stayed with my mom. And then my sons, could have been killed by these same idiots. So Billy Joel stuff came to a heartsick father, that's me, hearing the lyrics, not in some vacuum, but personal.
Yeah.
So to me, it's a huge deal. I just think Green Day is brilliant and prophetic, but I also think that their music, transcends the moment. I think it's going to be around 100 years from now. People trying to figure out what happened now are going to be listening to those songs.
I completely agree with you, and I've always thought that as well. And that's why they were, you don't ever like to say, well, this is my favorite band or that's my favorite band,
Right.
but they were one of my favorite bands, always.
Yeah, here's another Andy Warhol. This is a real one, as you like to say. And then this is Ed Paschke up here.
Right, I bought this from Ed myself from his studio, and used it on an album cover.
Yeah, it's great.
Yeah,
and
then Ed passed away recently, and I didn't realize that his art had appreciated in value until a guy from the LA County Museum of Art came over and tried to take it off my wall and said that this needs to be in the museum.
Yeah, and by the way, the LA County Museum of Art, I have a thing on why the curator is one of my heroes because of some of the work he's collected. And that's in Lucy too, so that's part of the bookend with Green Day. So you're actually, it's crazy because the art you have in here, in this house, and your own sensibility, and your own history, and now your involvement in politics, it really is stunning to me. Very personally kind of moving because I've spent the last 5 years trying to figure out the cultural impact of the right. My father used to comment on art from the point of view of a kind of a religious conservatism, but a knowledgeable one, not an idiot. And I talk about that in the book. But, I don't think without the impact of art and culture, we would have an alternative to Trump right now. I think the actual reformation that has to take place in education, in workers' rights, in women's rights, in reestablishing civil rights and all this other stuff, has to have some sort of cultural basis, in an American sort of renaissance of the kind that Billy Joe represents.
Yeah.
To me, a guy like Billy Joe or a filmmaker, like Joe Soloway, these people are the prophets of our time, and they have to be seen as such.
Right, the same way that Dylan was when we were kids.
That's what I'm saying.
Of course.
Yeah.
This one over here, by the way, was I went to visit REM in Athens, and they introduced me to this painter.
Yeah.
And I wound up buying one of his paintings, but it's a box just standing on the arms of a chair. And I always it sort of in some way reminds me of my favorite painter of all.
Yeah, which is Francis
Bacon.
And when I saw that, and I knew you collected some big work, I looked up and I thought, does he have a Francis Bacon hanging there? But
No, that's the closest I've
no,
come to
I
it.
know exactly why. But you told me before you should have bought Francis Bacon when he was hanging in LA restaurants.
I should have bought Francis Bacon. I thought of it many times, but it was a little out of my price range, and I thought the price might come down, and instead the price
Good luck
kept
with
going
that.
up and up and up. And then eventually, I was in Mexico City with Lou Reed, and we were in a museum, and I showed Lou a Francis Bacon painting, and he was flipped out over it. He loved it. He said he had never seen Francis Bacon before, and I said, Lou, why don't we call Francis Bacon and see if he'll do a painting for the new album? And Lou said, you think he really would? And I said, well, maybe, it's a possibility. And I tried to do it. Was a weekend, and I tried to do it on. My plan was to do it on Monday, and Francis Bacon died that day.
That's great.
So I walked around the corner and said, that's a Chuck Close. He says, yeah, that is a Chuck Close. So this is very cool. But Howie, you know, I think culture, art, the lack of the kind of anti-aesthetic moment we live in this country, the anti-intellectual moment, the anti-knowledge, anti-facts. Facts are dangerous. Climate change is dangerous. You know, evolution didn't happen. You know, somehow this all ties together with the background that I have. But I want you to talk a little bit about the kind of importance that you see not only in art and culture and education, but just this idea that we have to get back to the greatness of America based in ideas instead of this insanity we're looking at
Right,
now.
and art puts that into a context. So the kind of, for lack of a better word, politics that we're talking about is inside of the context of music, of paintings, of filmmaking, of literature. Without that, none of this other stuff would exist. I mean, and what would be the point of it anyway? I mean, it would be more like some kind of a society like George Orwell created. So it's important to remember that. I mean, it's why do we have public institutions that fund symphonies or that fund museums? I mean, that stuff is really, really important. And of course, we're now in a culture that doesn't want to do that anymore. Mm-hmm. I mean, I don't think that not George Bush, but Donald Trump thinks that that's a good way of using money. And whether he does anything about that or not, I'm sure that if a guy like Paul Ryan or a guy like Mike Pence ever gets their hands on power, we're really screwed.
Yeah, I mean, it goes beyond that because they're actually anti-education.
Yes,
and
that's
that
the
fits
worst of all.
But that fits in very much with my evangelical background in the sense that if you look at the victimology of the evangelical group, they look at universities as a threat.
Yeah.
You know, all the homeschool movement's all about keeping kids out of school, indoctrinating them, disciplining them, and if possible, keeping them out of college.
And now we have Betsy DeVos, the epitome of that.
Yeah,
kind of
and
thought.
that family, by the way, Rich DeVos, her father-in-law, funded the movies I made with my dad to the tune of $1.5 million apiece. Wow. And then he inscribed a book to me, to Frankie Schaeffer. This is like in 1979. A Young Hope for Capitalism, because he saw how it was all connected, and he funded gospel films. They funded our movies, yeah. And I knew this whole family, so it's like seeing ghosts. I mean, not that they would return my calls.
Scary ghosts.
Yeah, scary ghosts. So it's like I belong. I mean, I'm not saying this is really the case. It's a stretch, but I feel like it was almost like I was sort of in on the beginning of Hitler Youth, went to sleep for 40 years like Rip Van Winkle, woke up and they said, oh, by the way, this led to a Holocaust. Because that's where we got Trump now.
Yeah.
So, Chuck Close, folks.
How may I atone? I ask myself these questions silently and inwardly. How may I atone for helping to poison America with certainty addiction? How do I defend my grandchildren against the religious rights juggernaut I helped create? How do I reject what my parents stood for, fundamentalist fanaticism, and yet honor the love they gave me? How can I help my grandchildren stumble upon the goodness of life before they're sold towering mounds of brain-damaging garbage? How do I help save the world? And what kind of deluded messianic fool am I to believe that this is even possible?